So, Apple released their latest software iteration, and this time they're going with a yearly number naming scheme. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about iOS 26 being unveiled at WWDC 25, but let's put that aside for now. iOS 26, without a doubt, is going to guide and pave the way forward for how developers design their applications in the next couple of years. And not just on iOS, but across the entire ecosystem. This has been the biggest visual redesign we have seen since iOS 7 back in 2013. With iOS 26, we are seeing Apple return to its original design roots of skeuomorphism. But why is skeuomorphism making a comeback now? Well, I have a theory. You see, back in the early days of tech, designers and developers had to overcome the initial resistance in order to be adopted by the masses. They had all this amazing technology to sell, but most of it appealed only to professionals and enterprise customers. In order to crack the general masses, they had to somehow make the technology inviting and easily accessible for all users. In order to be adopted by the masses, it had to appear less mechanical and more friendly. They had to make things super obvious, to the point that even someone who has never used a computer could also know at first glance what would happen if something was clicked. Enter skeuomorphism. In case you haven't heard of skeuomorphism before, it is a design style where digital elements mimic real-world objects to make them seem more familiar. For example, a digital notepad might look exactly like a paper notebook to help people understand its purpose more quickly. Skeuomorphism became especially popular in user interface design during the late 2000s and early 2010s. Without it, interfaces were just pixels on a screen for the untrained eye. Skeuomorphism improved the user experience by letting users know exactly what was what. It reached its peak with the rise of smartphones and early mobile operating systems, especially around 2007 to 2013, when Apple and other companies used it prominently in their design language. So why did Apple ever stray away from the path of skeuomorphism then? Well, my best guess is that with iOS 7 in 2013, there was a lot of pressure on Apple to redefine and reinvent themselves. It had been 2 years since Steve's passing, and everyone was talking about how Apple will not be able to sustain themselves and continue to innovate and perform because it had lost its visionary soul. So, Apple was inclined to redefine themselves and show the market and the world that they still had it in them to bring something new to the table. Hence, they decided to go for a super minimal and modern route to detach their personality from the design language of the Steve Jobs era and define an entirely new era. Initially, this was met with a lot of resistance, but eventually people grew fond of this design language and even started to appreciate the simplicity and modern aesthetic. 12 years later today, it feels like we are back at square one again. Apple once again feels the pressure to reinvent themselves. The reason? Well, if the tech community is to be believed, the reason is that the design was long overdue. Personally, I do not understand this statement at all. Design is supposed to be a function of usability and not something that we should keep changing like a wardrobe. If something works and is great for accessibility and meets the needs of the users, then why change it? Not to mention, design is almost cyclical in nature. The same things keep coming in and going out of fashion. Don't believe me? Take a look at this camera icon from the skeuomorphic days, then again in the minimal era, and then again in the skeuomorphic era. Notice a pattern? So, this change almost feels like Apple giving in to the market pressure and changing for the sake of changing. But the even bigger and even more compelling reason is probably the massive disaster that they had with Apple Intelligence last year. My best guess is that they are trying to shift attention away from Apple Intelligence and make the world and the market focus on something new. And from the looks of things on social media, it's working. People are either hating this design change or loving it, but they're not talking about Apple Intelligence anymore. They're talking about iOS. Alright, so let us unpack this software update. By the time this video comes out, I've had a couple of days to play around with iOS 26, and these are my initial impressions. There are a total of 8 things that I liked and 2 that I'm not a big fan of. So let's start with the good. Okay, so right off the bat, let me address the obvious one, the design interface. I'm really happy with certain parts of this software upgrade. No doubt, a minimal and clean aesthetic feels nice to use, but sometimes it can feel a little lifeless, and I'll be the first to admit that skeuomorphism just feels brilliant to use. The ability to turn a page and see the page actually flip like a real book is so much fun to interact with. The whole glass aesthetic brings back a little life into the design of iOS. In this regard, Apple ditching the minimal lifeless design and getting back some more pop and feel back into the software feels like a win. I just wish they would find a middle ground and keep accessibility and readability in mind. More on this later in the video. Another much welcome improvement that I noticed in iOS 26 is the bottom navigation bar. The bottom navigation bar is a key part of literally any application on iOS. And an update to this means an update to how we navigate all applications on the iPhone. So, this is huge. The first thing you notice is that the design is much more fluid, offering adaptability depending on the use case of the application. This is brilliant because not all tabs are needed all the time. And if developers take full advantage of this, then they can actually trim the navigation bar to a sleeker design based on what the user is currently doing in their application. The second thing that you notice is that in all of Apple's first-party applications, the bottom navigation bar now contains a search icon. This is really cool for convenience and single-handed use. Phones have gotten so obnoxiously large over the last decade that Apple had to resort to software fixes such as reachability to address the growing discomfort of single-handed use. Not ideal. By the way, if you're like me and you prefer smaller, more manageable smartphones, you can check out the video that I've linked here and in the description below. Thanks to iOS 26, I'm sure other developers will have to follow suit to keep their applications looking fresh and up to date. And that is a win for all users. Because extending your thumb all the way to the top just to search something was so comically foolish. That design choice was actually an archaic remain of desktop design, where the navigation bar is usually located at the top of the screen. But for mobile use, that really did not make sense at all. And I'm really glad that this is finally addressed. The iOS 18 Photos app redesign will go down in history as the worst application redesign ever. No, seriously, it was downright unusable, and even for a nerd like me, I just could not get used to it. There were countless videos popping up everywhere on how to fix the Photos application. And I can only imagine how non-tech savvy people or older users were managing. Thankfully, Apple listened to the user feedback and finally brought back tab layout for the Photos application, thus ending our collective struggle for the last 1 year. Screenshots got a massive boost this year. Last year, there were already changes made to improve the functionality of screenshots. Features like copy and delete helped you take screenshots and share them wherever you wanted without having to clutter your photo library. This year, they have gone a step further and given us the option to search the internet for any object that you might capture in a screenshot. Really cool stuff. Now, you can call me old, but I still use my phone to make phone calls. And this is one of those features that was brushed past quickly in the demo, but I'm glad that it was introduced. Having quick access to all my favorites, my recent calls, and my voicemail in a single layout is just so convenient. Come to think of it, it's funny how Apple tried the same thing in the Photos app, giving us everything in a single screen, and we collectively hated it. I guess use case matters a lot, and you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. Google, I'm looking at you. What I love even more about this change is that it is completely optional.
Here, we're giving you the option to choose a new unified layout that brings together your favorites, recents, and voice.
In my opinion, this is how software should be implemented. Give users the choice. Let us choose between legacy or modern. Let us choose between complex or simple. Perhaps, if the Photos app update last year was rolled out like this, I'm guessing it would have faced much lesser criticism. Apple, please take notes for future releases. Options are always better. Another quality of life improvement is now we are able to see the time to charge estimation. This is such a welcome feature. While it does not change how you use your phone, but it does give you a little bit of more information. I just wish the implementation was as beautiful as some of the concepts made it out to be. But since this is just the first beta, who knows? Perhaps we might see an improvement in the upcoming betas. Oh, and now your iPhone will also tell you when your AirPods have finished charging. So overall good improvements around charging your devices. I quite love the camera app upgrades, or in this case, the simplifications, because it was becoming so cluttered and difficult to use. The gesture-based approach was really annoying and half the times unresponsive. While trying to navigate the basic options, you would sometimes miss the shot. Having clear navigational buttons is so much better. Two simple taps and you're at the option that you want to be at, as opposed to swiping up, then swiping left or right and then tapping. So, overall, big thumbs up to this change. The final feature that I really like is Hold Assist. I feel like this is going to be a highly used feature because with the advent of AI and customer service, it is becoming increasingly frustrating to try to resolve any issue via customer service. And when you're finally able to connect with a live human agent, they end up putting you on hold. Thankfully, now with Hold Assist, you don't have to halt everything else because you're preoccupied with a customer service call. You can just go about with your activities as normal and the iPhone will notify you when the customer service person is back on the call. Honestly, this is one of those quality of life improvement features that once we start using, we are going to wonder how did we ever live without it. Of course, no release is perfect. There are certain changes to this massive visual overhaul that are really jarring and just do not fit with the overall Apple design aesthetic. Okay, so now let me address a couple of issues that I have with this update. If I'm being honest, in several places the software feels a little unpolished and a little unfinished. Very un-Apple-like. I mean, look at this control center. It looks like something from the jailbreak community back in the early days of the iPhone. Apple is known for leading the pack when it comes to accessibility. But when they release something like this, it makes me question if they are favoring form over function. Background opacity and blurs exist for a reason. They enhance readability. But when you have a control center that looks like glass, I feel it is not in the best interest of ease of use. Now, before you come at me in the comment section, of course you could always go to the settings under the accessibility panel and turn on reduce transparency. But come on, look at these two implementations and tell me iOS 26 looks better than iOS 18. The elegant background blur which beautifully adapts based on what application I'm using is just such a refined implementation. Whereas on iOS 26, if I need readability, I'm greeted with a dull grey background which makes me feel like I'm operating a computer from the Matrix. But of course, I know we are talking about the very first beta version here. And perhaps Apple listens to some of the community feedback and improves readability and accessibility before the final release of this update. It is not even a big ask. Just increase the background blur a little bit and it fixes the issue. I'm really hoping they will do it before the final release. Alright, my second issue has to do with performance. This one is not exactly a critique, but more of a cautionary take. All these new beautiful and brilliant glass-like interfaces definitely are going to be GPU intensive, and they are going to take a toll on the battery compared to the minimal interfaces of the previous year. It will be very interesting to see how much of a hit the battery life will take because of these gorgeous, often over-the-top fluid animations. Not to mention, older devices might face more of a chokehold in trying to keep up with these animations. Planned obsolescence. Remember that? Overall, this is a solid update, both in terms of redesign and in terms of functionality. It definitely breathes some life back into iOS. But I strongly believe that Apple should not forget basic accessibility. Remember the Apple TV Generation 2 remote? That was the peak example of form over function. That remote was so incredibly thin and gorgeous and impossible to use. It would slip out of your hands constantly, it barely had any buttons. And when Apple redesigned that remote, every single person in the tech community was overjoyed because finally we had a functional remote. So while aesthetics are good, functionality is even better. I wanted to look at this clip from an iPhone 5 launch video.
Your thumb. It goes from here to here. This bigger screen goes from here to here.
This video is the prime example of how Apple was once focused on user experience over aesthetics. There was a clear logic and reason behind the decisions being made. I hope Apple keeps up that same spirit in mind with its software decisions as well, and does not forget functionality in pursuit of a design wow factor. Believe it or not, there are still plenty of things that have been lacking in iOS ever since the original iPhone was released. And every year I hope some of them will get addressed, and some of them have been addressed. But there's still a lot of features that I've been wanting and wishing for, and I've not been getting them. So my next video will address those pain points. Until then, thank you for watching.